Casey, welcome back onto the show.
Hey, great to be here.
Good to have you. I hope you had a Merry Christmas, Happy New Year as well. Something that you kind of been harping on all season long with this Eagles football team, Casey, is Chip Kelly does not seem to have a plan B. I remember you talking about this with Mike Gill multiple times throughout the football season, and it seems, Casey, at this right now current point at 6-9, 6-10, or 7-9, below 500 record for Chip Kelly, he did not have a plan B this football season.
Yeah, it certainly didn't have a – funny thing is that he didn't have a plan B for the Washington game this past week because if you look at that game, going into that contest, Philadelphia had allowed more defensive plays, had faced more plays from the opposing team than any team in the league, and you'd think that that would cause them to readjust where they're going to be and such. And it just I think that they ended up getting into a shootout kind of contest, and that's just they couldn't protect their defense, and that's what you got to do at this point of the year for the Eagles.
Yeah, Casey, you mentioned that. That's been one of my issues with Chip Kelly. I think, to be fair, you have to say his tempo has worked in this league. We're talking about for 2 years this was a top 5 offense, but when it doesn't work and you get those 40-second 3-and-outs and all of a sudden the plays pile up. I was looking at Malcolm Jenkins. He's played an unbelievable number of snaps this season. The effect it has on his own defense, why do you think there is a lack of, I don't know what the right word is, concern? He doesn't think it affects his own defense.
It kind of reminds me of, you remember George Allen?
Yeah.
He was the Hall of Fame coach for the Washington Redskins. In the 1970s, the idea for George Allen was he said the future is now, so I'm going to build my team around veteran players. And his teams would play great in September, October, November. And then in December, if you look at his team's records, it was terrible in December. And outside, he made the playoffs 7 times. His team made the playoffs 7 times. And outside of one season where they won 2 playoff games, they never won a playoff game. So his teams always played well early and played terrible late. And you'd think that Allen would see this and maybe adjust that the future is now thing. And so maybe I need some younger players. Maybe I need to adjust and adapt to the system a bit because, hey, it's not working later in the season. He never did. And he made the Hall of Fame, mind you, but again, he never won any championships and only made it into 1 championship game. So I think the same thing with Chip Kelly. It's like he just believes in his system so much. Even if the evidence piles up in the other direction, I think he's going to do the same thing and just say, well, it works, and that's what I'm going to go with.
Well, Casey, I go back to last season. Kerry Williams, who got a lot of criticism, I think it was week 3 of the season. He was kind of saying, we in essence, we can't keep this pace up. And he was talking about the practices, never mind the games where you have the extended number of plays the defense is seeing. Do you think there's something to the fact that the practices themselves are so up-paced? And if you think about the college level, 90, 100 players dressing versus 46 on game day in the NFL.
Yeah, and in college, Kelly had a system where he would rotate 17 or 18 defensive players into the contest. He wouldn't just do defensive line rotations like we're used to seeing that in the NFL, where a team will take a defensive lineman and rotate him in and out. He'd rotate at the linebacker level. He'd rotate at the secondary level. I mean, he was rotating players in at every single level. If you got 17, 18 guys who are playing the whole game, you're essentially rotating your entire defense at some point. You can't do that in the NFL. You just from both a personnel perspective, people don't have. Most teams don't have two starter level players, and you just don't have as many players. Period. And plus, you're not playing a bunch of Supreme Puff games where you can, maybe you can put in your second teamers and just leave them in there like Oregon could do a few times a year. That's just the case in the NFL. You've got to play your best players all the time, and I think I think Kelly just sees my pace system works, and it does at times, but he's just not looking at the longer term standpoint of what's going to happen if you go that route.
Yeah, Casey, Chip Kelly's not really a big picture kind of guy, and again, in the press conference on Monday, reporters continue to press the issue on number of plays ran. And this season, if that's your philosophy, you're getting beat by your opponents. You have less number of plays ran than your opponents. And, oh, by the way, you're 6-9, and your offense can only score 17 points per game. Should Chip Kelly really take a step back and say, you know what? Maybe it isn't so much about number of plays ran all the time. Maybe at certain points of the football game it should be, but as far as trying to win a football game, you should maybe kind of tail that back a little bit.
Yeah, I'd say it's funny that I'll give you some stats from last week's game because when he's talking about using pace to win games, I think maybe he was seeing that my defense is wore out at this point. And in the Washington contest, the Eagles called for in the first quarter they called for 9 rushing plays. So that's a lot of planned rushing plays. Okay, we're trying to run the ball a lot, probably to protect our defense. That was in a matchup against the defense. Washington, coming into that game, had allowed 690 passes. That's passes that go 11 or more yards downfield in the last, since week 12. And that's the most in the league. So the team was really struggling to stop the vertical pass, and you got Sam Bradford, who had the highest vertical yards for attempts since week 9. So your quarterback's hitting vertical passes, and the other team's defense is not allowing is allowing a lot of vertical passes, and you're running the ball 9 times in the first quarter. So maybe he was thinking, I have to protect my defense. I don't have a choice in this game. But it's like, this matchup is the kind of matchup that says you should go get into a shootout game. And then Kelly can't do it because he's trying to protect his defense. So it might have actually backfired in a different way this past week.
Casey Joyner, football scientist, ESPN.com, NFL insider on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN FM. You mentioned Sam Bradford there, Casey. He's played a little bit better down the stretch here. Does that warrant a 4-year contract extension? I don't think so. Is he worth getting over? Is he worth getting into a bidding war with 31 other NFL teams? I don't think so. What's your plan with Sam Bradford going forward here, Casey?
If I've got a quarterback under center who, again, since week 9 coming into this past week, have led the league in vertical yards per attempt for a good period of time, and I know if I keep him healthy that he can be at least top 10 quarterback. I know he can at least be that. Maybe even better than that if we get some talent around him and you can keep him healthy for a whole year. Maybe he can even be top 5. But if I know he can be a top 10 quarterback, the only reason I don't sign him is if I think I can go get a top 10 quarterback somewhere else. If I think I can get a person who can give me that kind of production. If the Eagles can't do that, then you have to go with Bradford because who else do you have? You don't have. Again, we talked about this. You don't have a plan B. So if you don't have, you better have a plan B because if you just say, hey, I can't sign him because for X, Y, or Z reasons without having a plan B, then you're assuring that you're going to have a bad record next year.
Well, Casey, in that vein then, and this is obviously speculative, but if Colin Kaepernick is cut by the 49ers or if he's on the market available for trade, is he a better fit for this particular system? Not necessarily a top 5 quarterback throughout the league or a top 10, as you stated, but for Chip Kelly's system, is he a better fit than Sam Bradford?
He can run the ball better than Bradford, obviously, because Bradford's not going to be a rushing quarterback. And Chip Kelly's worked with both, though. He's worked with either rushing quarterbacks or passing quarterbacks. And he was at Oregon. He had both, and he won with both. So he can do well from that perspective. And Kaepernick, in his rookie season, I believe I have this number right, he finished the first or second in vertical yard attempt and stretch vertical yards for attempt that season. So he's shown that he can hit the vertical pass given the right situation. So could he be a real good fit for this offense? Yes, but you have to be concerned if he's going to have injury issues just like Bradford does, especially if he's running the ball a lot. And I don't like the way things have ended for him in San Francisco. And, they see the type of guy who can respect in the locker room. You don't know those things. But I think if you're running Chip Kelly's system in the NFL, you're going to have a second quarterback. You can't just have the one quarterback. You've got to have somebody who can back him up, and this year the backup wasn't good enough. And so if you get Kaepernick and you only have Kaepernick and maybe you're backing up with Sanchez, you're still in the same boat from an injury perspective that you are this year. So they could do it, but I don't know that it's going to be, unless they get a plan B there, that they're going to be in any better shape.
Talking with Casey Joyner, the football scientist, ESPN.com. Casey, back to the defense. When I look at this defense, I see Fletcher Cox, and I see a tremendous player, but would even be better as a 3 technique and a 4-3. I see Benny Logan, who's a guy who could be a tremendous nose tackle. I see Vinny Curry, who looks to me like a weak side pass rusher. Michael Kendricks, Kiko Alonso, they would be better to me as weak side linebackers. Is the talent on this defense a better fit for a traditional 4-3 scheme?
I think they are. I would completely agree with you, especially on the Fletcher front. Put him in an under tackle, and in fact, you can put Logan at a 4-3 nose, and then you put Fletcher Cox as an under tackle on a 4-3. I think it'd be a fantastic front line. The thing that was troubling about this past weekend, though, is where it's funny that Washington in the first 3 quarters of that game, they had 4 planned rushing plays in each quarter. Now, they ran the ball more in the fourth quarter, so it spiked their rushing total, but This is a team that was going to say, we're going to go ahead and throw the ball at the Eagles' defense. We're going to go ahead and get them into a shootout. They had no fear of a shootout because of the way the Eagles' defenses wore out. They had no fear that say, hey, boy, the Eagles' offense is playing really well and our defense isn't playing that well. We got to keep away from that kind of contest. They didn't have any fear of it, and that says something about where the Eagles' defense is right now.
Casey, is there something to be said for, a lot of the Chip Kelly supporters will write in columns and will say that these moves, they just need time. Just give this thing time, and maybe, just maybe, this thing can kind of work out here. Is there something to be said for that, Casey, that you just got to give this thing time?
Maybe, but, he's been calling the shots now for a year. Maybe you give him more than 1 year, but you're just looking at the results going. Your defenses wore out. Your offensive line was thin to begin with and then got hurt with injuries. You got a quarterback who, as good as he can be, is banged up, and you didn't have a good plan B there. You're not getting the most out of your talent. You're just starting to see that from a personnel perspective that maybe Chip Kelly could recruit in college. There's no doubt about that, and he's gotten people to come up over to Philadelphia in the NFL. So it's not like he can't recruit, quote unquote, in the NFL. But as far as team building goes, as far as putting the right slot into the right talent things, I don't see that happening. If that's not the case, I think you'll have to look at it and say maybe your system will work, but maybe you're not as good at personnel as you think you are, and we need to put somebody else in charge of personnel.
And is that the answer, Casey? Would you recommend that this team goes in a different direction, that the general manager position? After all, Chip Kelly yesterday claimed he wasn't the general manager, playing the semantics game. Could Jeffrey Lurie go to him and say, oh, okay, Chip, you're not the general manager. Well, I'm going to hire a general manager and accept this or leave $13 million on the table. Do you think that's the way the owner of this football team should go?
I think coaches coach, players play, general managers general manage, owners own. I think that system tends to work best. You can have the coach. Sometimes the coach could be general manager, but looking through NFL history, it's best if you just let people do what they're best at. And it's not that you don't want Kelly involved in personnel, and you want to have a personnel person who, look, if this is Kelly's system and he wants this type of player at this type of position, go get him that type of player. If he wants big wide receivers, maybe they don't catch as well as the other guys, but he wants big guys who can block, then you go get him those sorts of players. You got to find a personnel guy who will give him who he wants, but I'm of the mindset that, like I said, the coaches coach, players play, and general managers general manage. And he may say he doesn't general manage, but somebody else needs to be fully in charge of that end of the bargain and just let him run his system and coach his team.
The quote from Patrick Peterson after the Eagles-Cardinals game was basically saying that the Eagles, they have their first 15 scripted plays, and then after that they pretty much run the same 15 plays or so. I think that's being kind. I think they have less than 15, Casey. But going back to last season, this team is now 7-12 in their last 19 football games. Has Chip Kelly been exposed? Has this offense been exposed? And if you give defensive coordinators and players time to game plan for it, has this offense been exposed, Casey?
Well, people used to say the same thing about Kubiak offenses. They'd say, oh, they were too basic. They'd say Mike Shanahan's offense. They would say Mike Shanahan's offense. Michael Strahan said one time that Mike Shanahan's offense was the stretch play and the bootleg, and that's all it was. Well, and mind you, teams might know what you're going to do, but if you can execute those plays, you can still win the game. But I think you don't have to have a lot of subterfuge to win, but it does help if you see the other team maybe is starting to read your plays, which it looked like a couple of times in the Washington game, like Philadelphia was running a couple of sweep plays, and Washington just knew that's what was coming, and they had no doubt. Maybe you need to build in some audibles or something to take advantage of that. I don't think it calls for an entire changing of the system, because predictability sometimes isn't necessarily a bad thing. But I think you need to be able to audible out of it and things, and at least have a counterpunch if you see teams doing that.
Isn't it difficult, though, Casey? Talking with Casey Joyner, the football scientist of ESPN.com. If you allow the quarterback to audible in this system, which I agree, especially if you have one capable of doing it, it's the best way to go in the NFL. Don't you, by nature, take out what makes this offense effective, and that's the tempo? If you're not running a play every 8 or 9 seconds, the repetitiveness becomes an issue.
Yeah, I think that is part of the reason why they don't, why it isn't in changing the plays. If you're trying to run fast pace, you can't really start to change the plays. But if you're like you mentioned before, if your plays aren't working or if you're getting those 3 and outs, then that part of the system's not working. Again, that just gets back to what we've been talking about from the beginning, that Chip Kelly's got to have some kind of plan B. And mind you, he'll adapt and adjust and things, but this tempo system, and just sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And again, it's funny because if you look at the Washington game this past week, and I keep coming back to it because I think the problems that they have in this contest, no matter how good they are, if they play like they did even the previous season, they struggle down the stretch. I think this team runs out of gas, and I think that no matter, let's put it this way, fatigue makes cowards of us all, what Vince Lombardi said, and I think the Eagles, if they don't prevent that issue, they could do all the audibles and have all the personnel changes that they want. They're still going to be in the same boat right now at Week 16 in 2016.
Casey Joyner, always good for a Vince Lombardi quote. Or a
George Allen reference.
George Allen was in there. He's got Bill Walsh in there a couple of times. Casey, have a happy New Year. We'll talk to you next week, okay?
Sounds great. Appreciate it.